Hello and welcome to the next episode of Java in the Cloud. Today I've got Henry joining us and he's going to talk about an open source project that he's working on, which I think is really important and really interesting for people making new modern Java applications. Henry, do you want to give us a bit of an introduction?
I'm a software engineer with a bunch of years of experience. I've been doing all sorts of crazy stuff in the financial industry, in the gaming industry, and other startups. I did a lot of Java. I did other languages in the JVM back then. I did Scala, Clojure. Now I'm doing a little bit of Java, a little bit of Golang. Been everywhere, I think. Uh, yeah, what else is to know about me?
Fantastic. Well, one thing I do want to know about you is obviously you've had a pretty awesome career. What sort of books have you found particularly interesting that have helped you in your career?
So I really like reading a lot of books, and it's difficult for me to pick one. But if I were to say, and it might sound a little corny because it's almost the topic of this episode, but I really like Release It from Michael Nygaard. It's about making sure your application behaves nicely. I think that was, at the time I read that book, it was an eye opener for me because it was really focused on making sure I got the business logic right, making sure that I got the correct algorithms and the right data structures and architecture, and then never really thought about how to make our application behave nicely and withstand a lot of pressure. So that was really, I think, the book that changed my career a little bit.
Wow, okay. I need to check that out. I don't think I've heard of that one.
Yeah,
So it's always
that's
nice for
really
me
good.
to get like new ideas of things to look up on. Awesome. So yeah, let's dive into Penna.
Mhm.
So what is Penna?
So Penna is an SLF4J backend that is very specialized for a very common use case, right? So it's precisely for when you want to write logs in a structured format to standard out, which is something very common. And I noticed through a bunch of companies that I've been working for that you always want to do something like that. You always want to write as much information as possible, and you don't want to care about managing where that log goes. It goes to standard out and someone else is going to pick it up. So, for example, you're going to have the Elastic log stack, or you're going to get Grafana log stack, pick that up and process it for you. So, because that's very common, I think yeah, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but I think uh, it's really good that we have something like that because it's like plug and play and you get it working. In a nutshell, I think that is Penna.
Yeah, and it's specialized for just that use case. You haven't overloaded this with lots of different features.
Uh,
I think the other
exactly.
interesting thing is that you've built this on much more modern versions of Java than a lot of other like core libraries.
Yeah. So exactly. So there's two things there you said. One is, yeah, I intentionally did not add a lot of features to it because it doesn't need, and we can talk a little bit more about it. And the other thing is, yeah, I do think that the Java community has a tendency to use older versions. And while it's not bad at all, I think when you have incentives to use newer things, that kind of pushes the community to do the modern Java and to use the modern stuff. So I felt like this was a great opportunity for us to start modernizing the whole ecosystem. And there's so many interesting features in the newer releases of Java that I think yeah, I mean, we should use them. We should make use of what's good that's coming out there.
Awesome. So I think this is similar to a conversation that I had with Max Anderson about Quarkus. So I asked him, why did he build a new application framework? And I guess the same question to you. What motivated you to make a new GitHub repository and crack the knuckles and say, today I'm going to start writing my own logging framework?
I don't think there's one big reason. It's actually a bunch of smaller reasons that resonate super well together that at the end of the day made me think like, okay, yeah, maybe this is a good idea. So I think it comes from, I wouldn't say frustration, but like small annoyances along the way. And so, for example, SLF4J has like a new-ish version, 2 point something, that allows you to do key value data where you don't have to do that in the MDC. We can talk more in SLF4J later, but that was something that I wanted to use, and it was not available in some loggers.
Okay.
Another thing is there's some like you have to configure. I'm using, or I was using Logback in the other projects, and Logback you configure through XML files, and XML files are not necessarily the nicest to work with. So I felt like if I want to use a logger, I wanted to do like the right thing from the start, right? I don't want to have to configure using XML files and make sure that I get, and in Logback specifically, and maybe that's true for Log4j as well, you have to know a little bit of the details of the implementation. So you know that you have to have an appender, and the appender has to have like an encoder. Encoder has a formatter, and you have to get those things in accordance to get the log as you want. That felt
Yeah.
like too
I feel
much.
like no one actually really knows about that or cares, but they just copy and paste from, let me find a similar project, copy and paste. So you know, you are heavily involved in it, but you also have little understanding of it.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's important. Like you do want to get the logs right for when you need them, for when you're like your application is under load, you want to make sure that you get all the information. And that's where I felt like I was betrayed by my logger because I was using this like key value API, and when I went to look at the logs, it was not there, so I couldn't find the information I was looking for, and it was frustrating. And I want to get all information I need when I need them, right? So at the end of the day, I think it was a bunch of that. And as I said, also like there's so many interesting features coming in the JVM and the Java language that I felt like, yeah, I need to use them. I need to try them. I need to see how they play. And I think it's the combination of all that that made me want to write something, like that made me make the move to write Penna.
That's awesome. So let's talk about some of the I think killer features of Penna and some of the reasons why I use it. I use it on all the projects that I'm building. I think it's really good. I do a lot of Java with Lambda, so I
Mm.
want something that's fast, quick to start up, quick and easy, simple approach. So I use it a lot. Talk to me about some of the best features. So you mentioned structured logging. Maybe we could just do a bit of a deep dive into structured logging and why it's important, especially now that people are, uh, you know, it works well with a lot of the cloud services. Yeah,
Absolutely. So I think in the beginning, we were used to see logs as just strings, just like small messages that you would write there. And it's like, yeah, this happened and then that happened. And like you can kind of follow the logic and the structure. Like you would see things happen. But that's okay when you have few customers or when you don't have like too much happening in parallel and when you have like one big monolithic system. Now, when you have multiple different distributed systems handling thousands of transactions per second, it's difficult to follow. So there's a lot of information more than just a message that you want to convey. And you want to convey that in a way that you can group important things together. So maybe what's happening in that particular area of my code or what's happening for this particular transaction, that particular user. So there's multiple variables you want to embed in your logs. And it's difficult to do that in a way that it's both machine and human readable with just a string of text. So you want to structure that in a way that is processable, both by machines and it's still fairly readable for humans. And that's where I think structured logging comes from. And one of the very popular ways of doing that is using JSON. And it's well supported in the logging processors. And it's fairly human readable as well because we're used to doing that for other things like HTTP requests, right? So a JSON structured logging, I think, is a fairly decent way of approaching this, right? and that's one of the features of Penna. Like it's by default, it's JSON structured logging, and you can't change it. So it's not like only by default, but it's also the way of writing. Another
Yeah,
feature.
I
Oh,
think
go on.
if we just stop there, like long gone are the days where you can open an application log and look through the transaction that you're trying to debug and go, oh, this is what happened. Now your transaction is completely intermixed with every other transaction that's happening, let alone that, one request for one user might be on one node and then another request on another node. They might jump from service to service. So now we don't look through log files anymore.
Exactly.
More likely is that we are searching on a request ID, which has been input into the log as an item that is done at the top of every request, maybe as part of the framework or a filter, and it is injected into every single log. The request ID, this value, and then that means that you can just search all of the logs across your distributed system and have a really, really tailored um, output of like this was the order service, this was the dispatch service, this was the invoice service, and you can just see everything across. Whereas if you weren't using structured logging, the developers on each service would have to know to include, like the
Hmm.
request ID in every log item. Otherwise, we could never group these things together.
Exactly. And even more complicated, they would have to make it in a way that the log, like you would find that information in that particular column or however you want to structure that. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So it is definitely adding a bit more formality to logging. Whereas, if I think back at my early career, it was just chaos. You would just write whatever you wanted to write, and maybe, the more seasoned people would make sure that they were including more data and using placeholders to put data in. But really, there was no sort of hard and fast set of rules or set of data that you would include in any particular log.
exactly. And then moving forward to the other features, I would say another one is it has good enough defaults. So this is also something that was designed from the start that I want to make sure that you have a configuration file if you need a configuration file. But otherwise, you plug it and it works out of the box, right? So most of the time, most people will want to get info logs, and that's it, right? And you will get info logs in JSON to standard out without having to do any configuration. If you want to have configuration, there's an additional library you can plug into, or you can extend the API and you can handle the configuration. So that is like, if it's optional, I can help you, right? But by default, you get the 95% use case. That's another thing. And I would say there's another feature. It's kind of difficult to call it a feature, really, but I would say more of a designing principle that Penna needs to be, and I love that word, unobtrusive. It has to be invisible. Like I don't want to feel it there. I don't want to have to know that I'm interfacing with a logger. So the best performance possible so it doesn't impact the application. But also as a more general thing, that like that embeds the configuration. Like I don't want to feel like I need to interface with the log if I need to configure it. So like the more invisible I can make it, the better, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the key things that attracted me to start with. I remember, looking at this project, oh, it's structured logging by default. Okay, so I don't need to use, any sort of Jackson logger to output my log into JSON. And so I started looking through, oh, how does Henry do it? He must, implement. He must have a dependency on Jackson or something. I was like, hold on, there's nothing here. Eventually, like going through the code, and I was like, oh, he's implemented his own Jackson output. So, there is no external dependency on, yet another big dependency. I think I remember last time I looked at the dependency for Penna, it was like 38 kilobytes. compared to Log4j, which is, I don't know, like 1.5 megabytes. So that unobtrusiveness, especially for somebody working in an area where, startup time really matters. Even just downloading that code, let alone booting it up, is a big deal.
Yeah, and I think that also is another manifestation, like having that as a small jar file. It's both intentional as and a consequence because it's like it's simple by default, it's very specialized. Not having a dependency is also another way of expressing that, because if you have multiple dependencies that can cause your application to uh, bundle in CVEs, for example, or increase your exposure to malicious attacks and risks and other stuff. And of course, it becomes a bigger jar. So even if on the optimistic side, it still can be a problem because you're like all of a sudden your application is hundreds of megabytes and it's difficult to start up.
Yeah,
Right.
and also from a maintenance point of view, every dependency that you add is obviously, another potential CVE, another potential release that you don't have to make. When Jackson or something else makes a release, then you would have to make a release, and I feel like that isn't really something that or it's definitely something that open source projects could do well with stepping back from.
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember when you're talking about configuration. I mean, every time I start an application or start building an application, I always get haunted by the SLF for J like default. Yeah, is it like no op logger, or basically it's saying um, you've added classes with references to the API, but there's no backend implementation. I'm like, oh my god, am I still looking at the same error message like 10 years later? I'm like, is this not solved yet? And yeah, I feel very happy that Penna just comes with a default configuration, and I don't think I've actually ever configured Penna. I think, or if I have, it's been very few, far between. So, I mean, the default configuration for me just works.
Yeah. So as another library or as another jar file, you can have YAML configuration to your application. And YAML was picked because it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. It's not the best configuration language, but it's very popular and it will feel familiar if you're doing Kubernetes, for example. Right. But it's optional and it's in a way that only if you really need to perhaps tone down a little bit of a noisy logger, or in your application, you really need to tone up your debug logs, for example, and then you could do that through configuration. But you can also do that if you feel like you could use the API for that. And the the idea of the API is that it enables you to that kind of goes a little bit against of the SLF4J API, that the logging backend would be transparent. But if you do that, you could make it in a way that based on volume, for example. Like I'm getting a lot of errors here. I need to tone up my debug logs. I need to start seeing debugs and maybe traces for that particular namespace, right? So you could programmatically do that. Penna allows for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very interesting.
So, but that is a bit not too much explored because, well, we need to get more people using, you need to get it more popular, and I need to write more documentation, and that takes a little bit of time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But it's
And
completely possible nowadays, like if you want to do that.
maybe if people are listening to this and thinking about how to improve the performance of their applications, and thinking that this would really fit their projects, how easy is it from people to move from other implementations of SLF4j, or if people are just using Log4j straight up, how
Mhm.
would you talk to them about potentially moving to Penna?
Yeah, so if you're already using SLF4J, it's as simple as replacing the jar. Like SLF4J will find it and it's going to work from start. So you don't need to do anything. Like you have to get rid of the configuration files and other stuff. So that's the work you're going to have there. If you're using Log4j directly, then there's maintenance cost of having to replace all those calls for the SLF4J API, which, I mean, that would happen as well if you were to do from log4j to logback, for example, right? And I want to mention one good benefit of SLF4J, which is because it's an API that is very transparent. Another thing you can do if you feel like maybe structured logging is not super good for tests, you can have one logback, one SLF4J API for runtime and another one for the tests. So you can
Oh,
swap the
yeah.
backends,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So if you're not comfortable with reading log files in your tests or log messages in your tests that are JSON structured, you could have them nicely printed the way you want it. But then you have like the more performant and simple implementation for your runtime.
That's actually really interesting. I might actually try that. Yeah, definitely when you're going through logs for debugging or going through the ID and debugging. I mean, you don't need all of that extra information. Yeah, the same use cases for the data just aren't there. So that's very interesting. I think I'll add that to my applications. That's really cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't be able to do that with Log4j. I guess you would change the appenders and exports and stuff, but then
Yeah, but then you have to know a little bit more about the implementation details of Log4j.
yeah, absolutely. That's really cool. Okay, so yeah, maybe we've won over some people. We're gonna get some people to try this. How can people help the project and help you out?
So I think, like from my point of view, and I'm very limited in testing because I'm testing on my own applications or the applications for the company I work for. Uh, I think Penna is in a stable state, but GitHub is it's kind of like a wall that I can't really get through. So I don't see people outside. I don't hear their experiences. Like I'm hearing yours now, but now it's still like two people. I want to hear more. I want to listen to other people, and I want to hear what they say about like their experiences with Penna. And maybe there are use cases that I have not imagined. And when I wrote Penna, it was in my head like I don't want to make any assumptions on who's using the library. There's a few assumptions, of course, but I don't want to make too much or too many assumptions. So getting people's feedback of like, yeah, I started using Penna and this happened or that happened, maybe positive, maybe negative. That will help me a lot. So that is like first wave helping. That's super simple. Like you use it and you give me a feedback. That would be
Yeah,
fantastic.
try it out, raise an issue. Yeah, this worked, this didn't work. I like this, I didn't like this.
Exactly. So, and then there's more levels, of course, you can go. You could maybe you find something, you want to improve something, you write a pull request. That would be fantastic. Or maybe, like, I don't know, you want to help fund the project. So then I could take some spare time from my work, my day work, and focus on Penna. That would be fantastic as well. So there's multiple ways we could go about it. Like I think that's the beauty of open source. Like you can contribute in so many ways. And this is one way of contributing, of course, like speaking about it, like sharing the information with other people so more people can get engaged with it. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, and ultimately, the problem, if I think about some of the open source work that I did at AWS, even with the kind of platform that AWS gave me, it was still hard to understand which companies were using the open source projects that I'd made or contributed to, and to what volume. So
Mhm.
say company X uses project Y. Well, is it in a tiny little research project, or is it powering a really important large throughput system? And I think that sort of information would also give you a lot of confidence to maybe go from 0.x to 1.0, which I think would it's not a big change from a code point of view, but from a confidence point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Just recently, like a couple of weeks ago, released a zero point 0.9 branch, and I really hope that's the last unstable-ish version, so that I can release 1.0 with the confidence that yeah, people will use it and uh, they'll have they'll be assured that that is stable, that is what they're looking for a logger. I mean, it is stable, but it is stable on my tests, and I want to get more people's like feedbacks on that, so then I know that it's very stable for everyone.
Yeah, and when I look at the project and the GitHub repository, you can see there's a lot of effort that you've put into testing and benchmarking and evaluating changes on each pull request.
Yeah, and I don't want to boast about it. I really don't want that to sound like uh, I'm better than the others. It's not like that, really. But Penna do have a very impressive performance, and I think that kind of like links back to that conversation you had with Max Anderson about like death by 1,000 cuts. I think when your application is under a lot of stress, when it's under a lot of load, then that's where the logging is the most important. Making sure that you're being bombarded by thousands of requests and your logger is not generating garbage to get your garbage collector to pause, like that is super important for me, right? So Penna, like the very basic use case where you just like log a simple message, that doesn't allocate a single byte of memory, right? It uses a bunch of stuff, and that's already there. It's pooled, it's optimized, and that's not because I really want to make something that is like bleeding edge, like super fantastic performance. It's because I don't want to cause impact. Again, being unobtrusive. So yeah, I think it's there's a lot there that I would really like people to see, and they would see the benefits of using it.
Yeah, I mean it's such a simple task, but it's a task that we're just always, it's always part of an application, so it's really really key to get right. Maybe one, quite different question. Have you ever used Penna with GraalVM native image?
Hmm, that's interesting. No, I haven't tried that. That idea has been sitting on the back of my head for a while, but honestly, I don't have too much visibility in how much Grail VM is being used. At least not from like my experiences. So like again, I said I've been through multiple companies like doing pure native Java, Kotlin, Scala. Most of the time, I wasn't seeing any use of Grail VM. So that is something interesting to try anyways.
Yeah.
And that would be also a very nice way of getting people to contribute. Like if you have that experience, you want to chime in, like I would love that. I think at some point I do want to consider Penna to be a complete project in the sense that I'm not going to add more features to it. And I don't think it's going to get too much maintenance, but I want to make sure that it keeps evolving with the JVM. And there's like new features coming, like if you look at stable values or scoped values, some of those features, I think they're like fantastic from a performance point of view, but other like scoped values really, I think that is a much better way of dealing with MDC, for example. Like for those that don't know what MDC is the message diagnostic context is where you add stuff to your log somewhere, and in other code point you get that information logged together, right? And the problem of that is that by SLF4J's design, it kind of forces you to have that as a thread local value. And from a library maintenance point of view, that causes me to create thread local values for all the threads, even if I'm not using MDC. So I try to minimize that all the time. So every time I'm logging it, I need to make sure that there's something in the MDC, right? So I need to check that thread local value. And if it's not there, it's going to create one. So that is something that I would really like SLF4J to think about in an API design that could evolve. So then we could use scope values to, again, have a
Yeah,
more
really cool.
modern API there.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and having this experience and feeding it back to SLF4J, because that is your ultimately your API that you're working against, right?
Exactly.
It's important that they move to allow you to add new things. Fantastic.
Yep.
Cool.
And I would say that's it for me.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Henry, for coming today. We'll include links to the Penna code repository in the show notes. And yeah, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much, Mark. This has been fantastic. I really love the opportunity. Thanks a lot.
And if you've appreciated this content, please think about subscribing and leaving us a thumbs up. That'd be really awesome. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye bye.